The first light of dawn stretched over the village, brushing rooftops of corrugated metal with soft gold, while the round thatched huts, worn by years of sun and wind, stood silently beside them. Smoke from cooking fires curled skyward, blending with the morning mist that seemed to carry the weight of generations. Children ran barefoot along paved paths, their laughter mingling with the soft calls of birds perched on acacia branches. Yet, even in this lively rhythm of life, a shadow lingered. The village was preparing for a farewell that would echo through its history. The funeral of the respected Patriarch, a man whose wisdom and authority had shaped every corner of their lives. The elders sat in solemn rows near the central courtyard, draped in ceremonial fabrics of deep indigo and ochre, their faces etched with lines of time, sorrow, and judgment. Their eyes, dark and knowing, observed every movement, weighing the young against the teachings of ancestors. The drums lay ready at the base of the village shrine, polished and taut, waiting to speak a language older than words. Smoke from incense spiraled upward, carrying prayers of guidance to the journey of the departed and warning of trials yet unseen. The village hummed with quiet activity. Women carefully folded ceremonial fabrics, laying them over carved wooden chairs that had served generations. The air smelled of earth, smoke, and sandalwood, a mixture both grounding and sacred. Men moved silently, checking offerings of kola nuts and yams, arranging them near the altar where the Patriarch's photograph rested. Even the young ones, curious and careful, understood that this day was not ordinary. Near the edge of the courtyard, a cluster of children played around a small shrine. They were unaware that the rhythmic tapping of their small feet and the chirping of birds mingled with the heavy sorrow of the elders. The contrast was sharp, life continuing amid the weight of death, modernity brushing shoulders with tradition. Their laughter, bright and innocent, was like a fragile thread connecting the old world with the new. Among the elders, murmurs rose like wind through reeds. "He taught us to walk with honor," said one, voice deep and steady, eyes fixed on a horizon where the sun climbed. "Yet the world changes," whispered another, adjusting the indigo cloth over his shoulders. "Some children forget the lessons of the past." A lone woman, carrying ceremonial offerings, moved carefully across the courtyard. She paused at the base of the ancestral tree, its twisted trunk a testament to centuries of life, struggle, and survival. Her hands trembled slightly as she laid a small bundle of herbs and incense, whispering prayers for the Patriarch's soul. The wind seemed to listen, stirring the leaves above and carrying her words across the village. In the distance, the first modern rooftops caught the sunlight. Satellite dishes glinted, wires stretched across walls, and the hum of early morning generators hinted at a world pressing in from beyond the hills. Yet here, in the heart of the village, tradition held firm. The contrast was palpable. It was as if the village itself balanced between two worlds, one that honored ancestors and sacred duty, and another that called for progress and a life untethered from the past. The drummers began their slow, solemn beat. It was not the joyful rhythm of celebration, but the heavy, resonant sound of mourning. Each strike carried the weight of history, a reminder that even in the presence of laughter and modernity, the ancestors watched, and judgment was patient yet inevitable. The villagers paused their tasks to feel the vibrations through the earth, a language they had understood since birth. The drum spoke of respect, sorrow, and the moral weight of life. Among the elders, eyes closed in silent remembrance, faces shadowed by early morning light. The Patriarch's legacy was present in every wrinkle, every gesture, every whispered instruction. They embodied the bridge between past and future, keeping the memory alive even as the village evolved around them. The courtyard was a tapestry of contrasts. Children chased one another around polished stones, while women in bright, patterned dresses arranged offerings with careful hands. Young men, some wearing jeans and T-shirts, balanced modernity with tradition, carrying bundles of ceremonial cloth with reverence. Even the smoke from cooking fires and incense twisted together in the cool morning air, a visual reminder that the old and new could coexist, yet not without tension. At the center, near the Patriarch's photograph and the altar, the family gathered. Their faces carried grief, but also unease. The children stared silently, sensing the gravity but not understanding the full weight of tradition. Elders spoke softly, issuing guidance with gentle authority. The modern touches, the neat paving, the solar-powered lights, the camera perched on a tripod for distant relatives, felt almost intrusive, a reminder that the village was changing, yet some truths remained immutable. The sound of the drums deepened. Each beat echoed across the courtyard, resonating in the chest, a heartbeat of the village itself. The elders' eyes followed the rhythm, hands clasped over walking sticks, a silent communication with the departed. Some villagers paused their conversations, bowing their heads or making subtle gestures of respect. The living acknowledged the dead, but also their own place in continuing story. A young boy ran past, carrying a small basket of flowers. He stumbled slightly, almost dropping his gift, and an elder called out, voice calm but firm, "Careful, child. The hands of the living honor those who have gone before." The boy nodded, cheeks flushed, understanding the weight in ways that words could not capture. As the sun rose higher, shadows shortened, yet the sense of solemnity deepened. Smoke, drums, and ritual combined to form a sacred atmosphere, a bubble of time suspended between life and death, tradition and modernity. Even the most casual observer could sense the tension. The village was alive with activity, yet it waited, breathing in anticipation of what was to come. A gentle wind stirred the ceremonial fabrics, carrying the scent of incense and earth across the gathering. The elders whispered prayers that mingled with the natural sounds of the morning, the rustling leaves, birdsong, and distant calls of traders beginning their day. All elements, sound, scent, motion, worked together to remind the villagers that the patriarch's guidance was not gone, that the ancestors were watching, and that respect, honor, and moral duty could not be ignored. Even as the modern rooftops glimmered in the morning sun, and children laughed along the paved paths, a subtle unease lingered in the air. Tradition waited patiently. Judgment, like the slow-moving drum beats, was unavoidable. The village knew that this funeral was not merely for the patriarch. It was a test for all who remained, of memory, honor, and fidelity to ancestral wisdom. The village lay still beneath the morning sun, a quiet hush over rooftops of rusted metal and round, thatched huts. Smoke spiraled from small cooking fires, carrying the scent of ground herbs and burning incense. This morning was unlike any other. The village prepared to bid farewell to a man whose presence had been a steady pulse in their lives, the respected patriarch whose voice had guided decisions, disputes, and dreams for decades. Though his body now lay in repose, his influence lingered, palpable in every corner of the settlement. Elders gathered near the central courtyard, their faces weathered by the sun, and their hands marked by decades of toil and wisdom. Each seated figure wore ceremonial cloths of indigo and ochre, embroidered with patterns passed down through generations. Their eyes, dark and reflective, scanned the gathering, taking in every movement. They represented the watchful ancestors, carrying the moral weight of history, keeping alive the memory of duty, honor, and righteousness. Today, we honor not just a man, but a legacy he leaves. One elder whispered, voice low, steady, vibrating with centuries of tradition. Another added, let the drum speak of respect, and the incense guide his spirit to the ancestors. Their murmurs carried over the courtyard, intertwining with the rising scent of burning resins, creating a tangible link between the living and the departed. Villagers moved in quiet, purposeful gestures. Women carried bundles of ceremonial fabrics, folding them meticulously and draping them over carved wooden chairs and family shrines. The colors of the cloth, deep maroons, golds, and earthy browns, contrast against the morning light, signaling both mourning and reverence. Each fold and placement was deliberate, a silent conversation with the past. Young men polished drums until their surfaces gleamed, the taut skins ready to resonate with the weight of ancestral rhythm. The first beat would speak of grief, of respect, and of the village's moral consciousness. It would carry through the air, vibrating to the bones of those present, reminding every heart of the sacred duty owed to those who had gone before. The patriarch's photograph rested at the center of the courtyard, surrounded by offerings of kola nuts, yams, and fresh flowers. Children, curious yet respectful, approached slowly, placing small tokens at his feet. They whispered their own private farewells, learning the ways of remembrance. One little girl, clutching a tiny cloth doll, knelt near the photograph, her head bowed. An elder leaned down, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. Even the smallest gestures honor the ancestors. Never forget this. The air was thick with mourning. Every sound seemed magnified. The soft footfalls of women arranging fabrics, the scrape of wooden stools, the distant crow of a rooster. But beneath it all was a living, invisible presence. The spirit of the patriarch and the ancestors who observed the living. The smoke rose in twisting columns, catching sunlight and creating halos around those moving through it. Each spiral of incense smoke carried prayers of protection, guidance, and the safe passage of the patriarch's soul. Villagers whispered softly among themselves, discussing the man's life, his wisdom, and the lessons he imparted. He taught us to speak truth to power, a middle-aged man murmured, eyes glistening. A woman replied, voice trembling, and he taught us to honor family above all. Today, we carry that lesson forward. Their words were gentle yet heavy with emotion, reflections of the man who had shaped their world. In one corner, a group of young boys arranged stones around a small, newly built shrine. Their hands shook slightly as they worked, aware that even their play and effort held significance in this sacred space. A boy glanced at an elder. Is this right? The elder nodded silently, eyes reflecting the weight of tradition, approving the ritual act without the need for more words. The drums, now perfectly tuned, waited in a quiet line. Soon, the first beat would echo across the village. The women and men, standing in measured formation, felt their hearts tighten with anticipation. Each drum was more than a musical instrument. It was a voice of ancestors, a symbol of continuity, justice, and communal memory. A breeze carried a mingled sense of earth, incense, and flowers across the courtyard. Shadows from the huts stretched long, crossing the polished stones of the central gathering area. The light seemed to pause, as if holding its breath for the rituals to begin. Every villager understood that today was more than mourning. It was an enactment of the values that had sustained them for generations. Children ceased their playful running, sensing the weight of the moment. Elders, standing with hands clasped behind their backs, exchanged silent glances of approval, watching the younger generation learn respect, patience, and the gravity of ancestral wisdom. Even those unfamiliar with every ritual step felt the tension, the responsibility, and the sacredness of the day. Near the central altar, a lone woman approached, carrying a small bowl of burning herbs. She knelt, inhaling deeply the smoke and whispering, "Guide him to the ancestors, keep him safe, and show us the path of honor." The words, though soft, were carried by the morning air, reaching every ear, mingling with the distant bird calls and the rustling leaves above. The patriarch's influence seemed to touch every corner of the village, even the rooftops glinting with modernity, the satellite dishes quietly capturing distant signals. The elders' eyes flickered between the old and the new, understanding that change is inevitable. Yet the values of duty, respect, and ancestral guidance must remain unbroken. Finally, the drum struck, low and steady at first, each beat vibrating to the hearts of all present. Smoke twisted in response, moving in patterns that seemed almost sentient. The villagers' movements synchronized with the rhythm, kneeling, bowing, and adjusting ceremonial fabrics. Even the children's eyes widened in recognition. This was the voice of the ancestors, speaking through the living. Every gesture, every folded cloth, every whispered prayer reinforced a single truth. The patriarch's life was honored not just by mourning, but by the acknowledgement of moral responsibility. The village stood united in grief, yet alive with the power of remembrance and ritual, bridging the past and the present in a moment suspended between worlds. And as the sun rose higher, gilding the rooftops and huts alike, the village remained still yet vibrant, a living testament to the intertwining of tradition, modernity, and the enduring presence of those who guide even from beyond the grave. The sun had barely risen over the village, yet the air pulsed with the sound of drums. Deep, resonant beats echoed across the thatched roofs and modern rooftops alike, carrying the weight of sorrow and memory. Each strike reverberated through the dusty streets and over the small paved paths, stirring the hearts of all who listened. The drum spoke a language older than words, of grief, ancestral presence, and the moral gravity that guided the village through generations. Elders, seated on carved stools near the central courtyard, nodded subtly with each beat. Their faces were lined with decades of wisdom, eyes heavy with the knowledge that the rhythms were not merely music, but messages. One elder whispered to another, voice low but firm, "The drums speak of him. Listen carefully, for they tell us not just of death, but of duty left behind." The villagers, aware of the sacred significance, moved in silent ritual. Women knelt near ceremonial shrines, placing handfuls of incense into bronze burners. Smoke curled upward in twisting spirals, mingling with the morning mist. Its scent was both bitter and sweet, a bridge between the living and the departed. Each villager carried a small token, colonnuts, folded cloths, or fresh flowers, placing them with careful hands. The gestures, subtle yet deliberate, were acts of reverence, acknowledging the patriarch who had shaped their lives and the ancestral guidance that still watched over them. Among the youth, some children mirrored the adults, tapping their fingers lightly on miniature drums, learning the language of rhythm. One boy looked at an elder, curiosity mingling with respect. "Why do the drums cry, uncle?" he asked softly. The elder rested a heavy hand on his shoulder. "They do not cry, young one. They speak. They speak of loss, of justice, of the balance that must remain between our world and the spirit world. Learn to hear, and you will understand the duty we carry." The sound of the drums was more than mere mourning. It was storytelling. Each beat told of the patriarch's life, from his youth in the fields to his rise as a wise leader. Villagers could hear his courage in the patterns, his patience in the pauses, and his moral guidance in the resonant echoes. The drums warned, too, of pride and neglect, teaching that duty to family and community was eternal, and that abandoning it could invite disaster. Elders stood as the rhythm deepened, voices low, chanting blessings that intertwined with the drum beats. "May your journey be guided," one intoned. "May your spirit walk the path of truth," another added. The children, kneeling nearby, repeated the sounds in their quiet way, learning the language of the ancestors. Even the women arranging ceremonial fabrics seemed to sway with the rhythm, as if the patterns themselves responded to the ancestral voice carried by the drums. Smoke from incense and cooking fires twisted into the sky, mingling with the morning light. Its dance mirrored the pulse of the drums, rising and falling, spiraling and collapsing, carrying sorrow and respect to the heavens. The villagers, though young and old alike, moved instinctively, their bodies and gestures shaped by the sound. A mother held her infant close, rocking gently in sync with the rhythm, teaching the child to recognize the voice of community and ancestors in the subtle, solemn beat. The rhythm of the drums grew steadier, deliberate, a heartbeat echoing through the village. Even those uninitiated in ritual felt its power. They paused in their tasks, folding fabrics, arranging flowers, tending fires, becoming part of the living story. It was a reminder. Grief was communal, honor was shared, and memory was a sacred obligation. A young man, recently returned from the city, carried a polished drum to the courtyard. His modern clothes contrasted sharply with the traditional scene, yet he knelt before the elders and allowed the drum to speak through him. His hands struck with careful precision, each beat a bridge between the old ways and the new life he had embraced beyond the village. An elder nodded approvingly, murmuring, "Even in the world beyond, remember the voice of the ancestors. Let it guide you home." The drums carried another message, subtle but unmistakable. Pride and neglect had no place in the village. Every beat reminded the living that duties left undone, promises unkept, and respect unoffered would ripple beyond the grave. The elder's eyes scanned the gathering, noticing subtle gestures. A child hesitant to place a token, a youth distracted by city life, a woman caught in thought instead of ritual. Each lapse was noted, and the drums made them known softly, insistently. Throughout the morning, the drums spoke to every corner of the village. Their language required listening, their rhythm demanded participation, and their power reminded each heart that the past and future were inseparable. The courtyard filled with subtle movement. Small bows, gentle touches of incense to the ground, whispered prayers, all choreographed by the invisible hand of ancestral guidance. At the center, near the patriarch's photograph, the drums grew deeper, more resonant. Smoke spiraled higher, sunlight catching the edges of ceremonial fabrics and carved wooden chairs. The village collectively inhaled the weight of this sound, feeling both sorrow and a sacred duty pressing upon them. Even the birds, perched on rooftops and shrine posts, seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the importance of the moment. An elder, standing near the central shrine, raised his hands. The drumbeat slowed slightly, allowing his voice to rise above the rhythm. We honor him, not merely because he lived, but because he taught us to live rightly. The drums remind us of this. They speak of sorrow, yes, but also of justice, of vigilance, of the moral path each of us must follow. His words, simple yet profound, echoed across the courtyard, blending seamlessly with the ancestral voice of the drums. In that moment, the village felt the full weight of presence and absence, life and death. The drumbeats carried history, morality, and warning alike. The children, kneeling or standing nearby, felt their hearts beat in rhythm, learning that grief was not only sorrow but a guide. The elders, seated with measured calm, witnessed this transference of knowledge and tradition, understanding that the Patriarch's influence would endure through those who listened, who learned, and who acted. As the morning deepened, the village moved in harmony with the drum. Each beat told the story of the Patriarch, his courage, his leadership, his failures, and his victories. Each sound carried the silent warnings of ancestors, urging respect, honor, and duty. The courtyard, alive with ritual and remembrance, was a living testament to the power of tradition and the deep moral fabric that held the community together, even as modernity whispered from the rooftops beyond. By midday, the drumming softened, the smoke settled, and a solemn calm descended. The villagers, young and old, had fulfilled their ritual duties, honoring the Patriarch and listening to the lessons carried by rhythm. The elders, satisfied, exchanged approving nods. The children, eyes wide and hearts full, carried forward the sacred knowledge. Grief, honor, and ancestral guidance were inseparable threads in the fabric of life. And as the sun rose high, illuminating the juxtaposition of huts and modern roofs, the drumbeats receded, leaving behind a village unified in memory, instruction, and reverence, a place where the past, present, and future moved together under the watchful eyes of ancestors. The village square was alive with a quiet, measured intensity. Morning mist clung to the rooftops of the modern houses that peeked above the traditional huts, and the air smelled of earth and incense. At the heart of the courtyard, a circle of elders sat upon finely carved stools, their presence commanding respect. Their faces, lined with the stories of decades, were solemn, reflecting both grief for the departed Patriarch and the heavy weight of moral authority they carried. Elder Njoki, the eldest among them, fingers intertwined over his walking staff, spoke in a voice low and deliberate. We honor the man who guided this village, yet we must ensure the rites are unbroken. Tradition must remain, even as the winds of change blow. Around him, the other elders nodded, eyes sharp and unwavering, reading the gestures of each villager as though the spirits of the ancestors themselves were observing. The younger villagers moved among the preparations, arranging ceremonial fabrics, lighting incense, and polishing the drums that would echo the morning. Some carried small gifts, bowls of kola nuts or bundles of leaves, offerings to be placed before the shrines. Yet their movements were tentative, uncertain. Modernity had taught them efficiency, speed, and pragmatism. But here, tradition demanded patience, care, and attention to symbolic detail. A subtle tension rippled through the gathering. Young men in crisp, city-tailored shirts hesitated before the shrines, their hands lingering over sacred objects. A young woman, her hair carefully styled in modern braids, adjusted a ceremonial cloth with a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Elder Amari, seated at the center, noticed. His gaze, steady and piercing, spoke volumes without words. "Respect the rituals," he murmured to no one in particular. "Disrespect them, and the ancestors will speak in ways you cannot undo." Drums beat softly in the background, a slow and measured rhythm that echoed across the square. Each thump carried a message: grief for the Patriarch, warnings for those who will forget duty, and a reminder that moral authority did not bend to convenience. The elders' eyes followed the rhythm as closely as the hands of the drummers. Even the young felt its pull, shoulders straightening, heart steadying, as if the beat itself demanded reverence. Elder Kofi, known for his stern wisdom, rose and moved among the younger generation. "Do not think that because you live with the city's ways, you are free from our rules," he said firmly, voice carrying across the courtyard. "The past guides the present. Those who forget it stumble blindly into shame. The words hung in the air like smoke from the incense, curling and lingering, touching every listener with the gravity of ancestral expectation. Nearby, a group of children watched in awe. They mimicked the movement of the elders, bowing low before the shrines, placing leaves carefully atop ceremonial fabrics. Their small hands trembled with both excitement and fear, learning that respect was not merely taught but performed, that morality was enacted as much as it was spoken. Elder Njoki caught their eyes and nodded, a smile breaking briefly through his solemnity. You will learn, little ones. The drums, the rituals, the wisdom, they will guide you long after we are gone. The elders themselves were symbols of both continuity and judgment. Their eyes did not merely see the actions of the living. They measured intent, discerned pride from humility, and weighed the respect offered to duty against the lure of modern distractions. Elder Amina, draped in a ceremonial cloth patterned with sacred symbols, leaned forward slightly. Notice the hesitation, she whispered to Elder Kofi. See how the city children fidget with our sacred objects. It is pride or perhaps fear, but the consequences are the same. A sudden gust of wind swept through the courtyard, rustling the fabrics and flickering the flames of incense. The sound was like a sigh from the ancestors themselves, a reminder that the living were always under watchful eyes. The elders sat unflinching, faces serene yet sharp, absorbing the message. The younger villagers paused, hands frozen mid-gesture, aware that every misstep was seen and remembered. The funeral drum shifted subtly, the slow mourning beat giving way to more intricate patterns. Each rhythm was deliberate, communicating layers of motion, sorrow for the patriarch, admonition for the living, and a caution to the modern generation that had begun to blur the lines between duty and convenience. The elders' eyes followed every strike, reading the young as the drum spoke through them. Elder Njoki spoke again, voice carrying over the rhythm. Our duties are not to be ignored. A leader dies, but the moral compass remains. If we fail in our observances, it is not only the village that suffers, it is the spirit of our people that falters. His gaze swept across the courtyard, settling briefly on a young man in a pressed shirt who had paused near the ceremonial drums. The youth bowed deeply, murmuring an apology, and the elder nodded once, satisfied that respect had been acknowledged. Throughout the morning, small interactions layered tension upon reverence. A young woman offered incense too quickly, and Elder Amari corrected her gently but firmly. A boy dropped a handful of leaves near a shrine, his fingers shaking, and Elder Kofi guided him, whispering the ancient words that gave meaning to the gesture. Each moment underscored a lesson. The elder's authority was not harshness for its own sake, but a living embodiment of ancestral wisdom. As incense smoke spiraled upward, the elders' faces reflected the full spectrum of emotion: grief for their departed peer, pride in the continued observance of sacred rituals, and concern for a generation learning to balance modern life with tradition. Their presence was at once comforting and intimidating, a reminder that the village's moral and spiritual fabric depended on both memory and action. The drums slowed, then softened to a gentle heartbeat, and the village square settled into a tense, expectant quiet. Even the birds paused in their morning flight, and the children held their breaths as though sensing the weight of the moment. The elders remained seated, eyes unwavering, guardians of both ritual and morality. Every villager understood. This was not merely a funeral, but a lesson in duty, a reminder that life and death, modernity and tradition coexist under the scrutiny of ancestral guidance. And as the sun rose higher, glinting off modern rooftops and traditional thatch alike, the elders' watchful eyes met every gaze. In their silent authority lay the enduring truth. Grief was sacred, tradition unbroken, and moral responsibility eternal. The village, caught between past and present, moved in subtle harmony, guided by the drumming of generations and the steady, patient gaze of its elders. The sun rose over the village slowly, spilling gold across rooftops of tin and thatch alike. Smoke from cooking, the village awoke under a pale morning sun that glimmered across rooftops, both modern and ancient, where tin met clay and wood, and where the laughter of children mingled with the distant crowing of roosters. The day, however, was not for play. It carried the weight of grief, heavy as the smoke curling from the incense burned in quiet corners of homes, signaling respect to ancestors who watched over the living. Along the main path leading to the family compound, villagers moved with purpose. Women dressed in deep indigo and crimson fabrics arranged ceremonial cloths, their hands steady despite the quiver in their hearts. Men carried polished drums, placing them in careful circles, their skins taut and waiting to echo the sorrow that no words could fully express. The rhythmic beating of these drums would later tell stories of loss, of honor, of duty neglected and remembered. Elders sat beneath the shade of the great baobab tree, their eyes heavy with years of wisdom. Each gaze carried judgment and memory alike, reflecting the lives of the departed and the responsibilities left behind. Their hands, marked by age and toil, rested upon walking sticks or folded across laps as they observed a younger generation bustling with preparations. These elders were the anchors of tradition. Every flicker of their glance reminded the villagers that customs were not mere ritual, but the very heartbeat of the community. Soft murmurs passed from lip to lip among the villagers. "He taught us well," one whispered, his eyes tracing the lines of the ceremonial fabrics draped over the tables. "It is our duty to honor him," replied another, nodding slowly, though her gaze lingered on the youth who fidgeted with smartphones and plastic chairs, a tension between the old ways and the new. These whispers were layered with respect, yes, but also judgment, an invisible measuring of loyalty, a questioning of devotion, and a cautionary observation of modern distractions encroaching on sacred practices. Amidst the preparations, young women draped colorful beads over ceremonial offerings, while children carried small baskets of kola nuts and dried fruits. Their presence was a bridge between the past and the present. Their innocence a promise, their actions a test of whether the teachings of the elders would survive into the future. "Do not forget the path of your fathers," an elder muttered softly, so only those nearby could hear. Yet the words carried like a quiet drumbeat, reverberating in hearts. The aroma of burning incense intertwined with the earthy scent of wet soil, freshly tilled for the grave. Villagers murmured prayers in low tones, honoring both the patriarch's life and the ancestral spirits they believed hovered unseen above. Every action, the folding of cloth, the polishing of drum skins, the careful placement of ceremonial gourds, was a story in motion, a language of respect that transcended words. Yet beneath the surface of ritual and rhythm, a subtle tension hummed. The younger villagers, dressed in a blend of traditional prints and contemporary fabrics, fidgeted, their movements betraying impatience or uncertainty. Smartphones peeped quietly from pockets, modern watches were checked discreetly, and glances exchanged across the compound whispered silent questions. Could the past and present truly coexist without clash? Was respect enough, or would pride and distraction diminish the legacy of the departed patriarch? The drums began to hum softly, their low, resonant tones speaking in a language older than memory. Each thrum was not merely sound but a vessel of ancestral wisdom, conveying sorrow, warning, and moral weight. The villagers instinctively adjusted their posture, bending heads slightly in deference to the unseen spirits listening. Mothers clutched children a little closer. Young men straightened their backs. Even the air seemed charged with expectation, as if the trees themselves leaned closer to witness whether these rites would honor the balance between tradition and the encroaching modern world. A hush fell as the chief elder, a man whose eyes had seen generations rise and fall, lifted a hand to still the whispers. "We honor the life of one who taught us the way," he began, his voice low and firm, carrying both sorrow and authority. "And we remember that our duty does not end with him. Each action, each thought, each gesture must reflect our respect for the ancestors, lest we forget who we are." His words were absorbed silently, like the gentle hum of a distant river. The villagers bowed their heads, aware of the weight of legacy pressing upon their shoulders. Even those caught between modernity and tradition felt it, the quiet judgment of history, the subtle admonishment of ancestors. And in that stillness, the drumming, the smoke, and the ceremonial fabrics whispered together in a symphony of remembrance and caution. As the morning stretched on, small signs of human emotion intertwined with ritual precision. A young man adjusted the ceremonial cloth he had laid out, noticing a crease and muttering, "Grandfather would not approve." A woman rearranged the beads she had strung, her fingers trembling from grief and anticipation. The youngest children, sensing the gravity, knelt quietly, placing kola nuts carefully in their designated spots, asking with innocent eyes, "Is this enough?" The elders watched all of this, the weight of their judgment palpable. Their faces were masked of solemnity, yet within each was a spark of hope that these rituals, these gestures of reverence, would preserve not only the memory of the patriarch, but also the moral and cultural fabric of the village. And yet, beneath their calm, a faint worry lingered. Modern distractions, impatience, and pride were subtle but insistent, and the harmony of tradition was delicate. The air was thick now with the scent of incense, the polish of drums gleaming under the sun, and the deep, steady thrum of rhythm echoing through the village. This was not merely a funeral. It was a test, a proving ground of respect, memory, and cultural endurance. And while grief hung heavy like the morning mist, there was also an unspoken lesson. Life, death, and legacy are intertwined, and the balance between the old ways and the new must be honored lest it crumble under neglect. The first rays of sun struck the ceremonial fabrics, highlighting colors of crimson, gold, and indigo, reflecting the pride of the patriarch and the depth of ancestral wisdom. The drums softened, their tones more meditative now, as if waiting for the next act in a story older than any villager present. And in that moment, between preparation and ceremony, between whispers and silence, the village held its collective breath, caught between reverence of the past and the inevitable pull of the future. The village seemed to hold its breath. The morning sun poured golden light over rooftops of corrugated tin and clay, casting long shadows that danced across the dirt paths. Smoke from incense spiraled upward, twisting in the warm breeze, carrying prayers for the patriarch whose body now lay in state beneath a canopy of ceremonial cloths. The fabrics were deep red and gold, each fold meticulously arranged to honor his life and the ancestors who had guided him. Drums rested in perfect alignment, their taut skins polished and waiting. But the rhythm that had once guided the villagers in preparation now faded into an almost reverent stillness. Only the soft, distant chirping of birds punctuated the quiet. The heartbeat of the village seemed suspended, as if nature itself paused in respect for the passing of man who had shaped generations. Elders sat in their honored places, their faces carved with the lines of years and wisdom. Their eyes, pools of solemnity, swept over the young and old alike. Each movement, each subtle nod, was a judgment rendered silently, an acknowledgment of duty performed or neglected. They were both witnesses and guardians, holding the moral compass of the village in their gaze. A young boy adjusted the ceremonial incense burner with trembling hands. "Is it enough, uncle?" he whispered to the elder beside him. The man placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "It is not the measure of the smoke, child, but the heart behind it. The spirits know our sorrow. They see the truth of our respect." Around them, the villagers moved quietly, their usual chatter hushed. Mothers held children close. Fathers straightened their backs, feeling the weight of generations upon their shoulders. Even the modern elements, painted walls of new houses, metal gates, the occasional cell phone quietly tucked into a pocket, seemed to step back in acknowledgment of the ancient rites unfolding. The village existed in a delicate balance of old and new, each respecting the other's presence, yet aware of underlying tensions. The silence was profound. It was not empty, but layered, filled with anticipation, grief, and the invisible gaze of ancestors. The drummers, once vibrant and commanding, now rested their hands lightly on the taut skins, fingers poised still, as if waiting for permission from a higher authority. Every beat would be meaningful, each sound a thread in the story that connected the living to the dead. Whispers flowed across the compound, soft and cautious. "He would have wanted this," a woman murmured, adjusting the folds of ceremonial cloth draped over her shoulder. "Yes," replied an elder, "but remember, it is not only about honoring him. It is about honoring what he stood for, what we carry forward as a people." From the far end of the compound, a young man glanced nervously at the elders. His modern shirt was neat, pressed, yet slightly at odds with the traditional fabrics surrounding him. He swallowed, aware of their quiet scrutiny. His mother, standing beside him, whispered, "Show respect, even if you do not fully understand. It is our duty to the past and to the spirits." The incense burned steadily, its sweet, bitter scent mingling with the earthy aroma of the soil. Every curl of smoke seemed alive, spiraling toward unseen eyes. The villagers bowed their heads as it rose, knowing that ancestors were listening. Even the wind softened its voice, carrying the fragrance slowly across the village, brushing against the huts, the trees, and the ceremonial spaces. An elder, the eldest among them, finally spoke, his voice low but resonant. "We honor not only his life, but the spirit that guides us still. Let us hold this silence, for in it the truth of duty and respect is revealed." The villagers obeyed instinctively, their bodies still, their hearts heavy. No laughter, no idle chatter. Only the occasional creak of a wooden chair or the soft shuffle of feet disturbed the calm. Children, sensing the weight, knelt quietly, observing the rituals with wide eyes. Even the youths, who often hurried toward the allure of modern life, were still, calling the gravity of a moment that transcended time. Within this hush, family tensions, long buried beneath everyday routines, began to stir subtly. Glances were exchanged between siblings, averted quickly. The youngest sons and daughters shifted under the weight of the elder's judgment. The patriarch's legacy, so solid in life, now hung between reverence and scrutiny. Decisions once made in secrecy or pride were hinted at in careful whispers, and the stillness made every thought heavier, every memory sharper. A daughter placed her hand lightly on her mother's arm. "Do you think Father will forgive them?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Her mother's eyes, reflecting grief and wisdom, met hers. "Forgiveness is in the heart, child. But respect must be shown before words can follow." The air thickened as if in agreement. The ceremonial fabric swayed slightly in a soft breeze, incense smoke twisting higher, and the shadows of the elders stretched long across the ground, protective and watchful. Even the village dogs, usually noisy at dawn, lay still, sensing the sacred gravity of the moment. Time seemed suspended. The living were aware of the dead, the modern aware of the ancient, and every villager felt the weight of lineage pressing on their shoulders. The funeral had become more than ceremony. It was a test, a moment of truth. How each would act, what each would say or withhold, would ripple through the village long after the last drumbeat. Finally, the eldest elder raised his head slightly, eyes scanning the crowd, and nodded subtly. A single, deliberate beat on the drums sounded, not loud, not celebratory, but resonant, carrying through the still air. It was an acknowledgement that the ritual was near its heart, that silence had spoken, that the ancestors were listening, and that the family must now confront their grief, their pride, and their responsibilities. The villagers exhaled collectively, though quietly. The moment had shifted. Tension and reverence coexisted. The stage was set, and the next acts, confessions, revelations, and the moral reckonings, would follow as naturally as the drum beats, carried forward by the spirits of the past and the choices of the living. And in that delicate balance between silence and sound, between grief and anticipation, the village held fast, suspended in the moral and emotional gravity that only a true African tale could carry, a story where ancestors watched, tradition judged, and the living stood at the edge of revelation.